Hi, I'm Amanda Evans and I'm a quilter here in New Zealand, and today we're going to have a look at a few tips that will help you avoid stippling in your quilts. Now, I'm a mad stippler. I love stippling and I've stippled whole queen size quilts, and I've discovered in the last year or so that it's a lot easier to do other things apart from stippling, and it's not quite as boring for you or the person getting the quilt. So when it came this week to quilting this quilt, it's called Criss-cross. It's a Moda Bake Shop quilt pattern. I started looking at it, and it's pretty much a geometric pattern. So whenever I'm making a quilt, I always do a test piece. I have a few orphan blocks. I sew them together, and then I use the same sort of threads and the same tension to work out what I'm going to do on my quilt. And with this sample in my head, of course, because I've already quilted it several times in my dreams, I thought a whole lot of straight lines would work best and green thread. But once I'd done my test piece, same backing, same filling and same top as the actual quilt, I discovered that the piece that I liked most was this piece of white quilting here. I like the negative parts of the quilt as much as I like the positive parts. So I decided to actually work more on doing free motion quilting in the negative parts of the quilt, the white parts, and keep the stitching on the crisscross brightly coloured parts as simple as possible to make the negative parts of the quilt really pop. So the design of this quilt has these negative spaces that actually form an 8-pointed star. So what I thought I'd do is work out a pattern of my own that I could fill that 8-pointed star and not just stipple it. So to do that, I find a piece of this template plastic. This is just a piece of plastic from someone's, office files that they've ripped off and shared it with other quilters in our group. So that's what I'm going to use. Pop my plastic down there, draw around the outside, pencil like that. So just around the outside of that. I'll just work out what my where my centre point is and where my diagonals are. So I go from centre to centre. Like that. Right. Okay, so I'm going to leave a bit of space around the outside, so there's some white space. So I'm just going to curve that into there, curve that into there. These are the little leaves, so they'll come out like that. You can always make this out of paper and fold it in half or in quarters to get it exactly right. And then trace that folded paper onto your template. I'm going to go all the way through the middle because otherwise the whole thing will start falling apart. So once you've cut those out, you'll end up with a template that looks a little bit like this. It's got my 4 petals in the corners and my intermediate petals, and that's going to fit straight over the top of my 8-pointed star. Okay, so then you just need to mark it up. So you line your template up, and it doesn't need to be completely accurate because, your free motion quilting is going to be slightly less than scientific anyway. Right, so once you've got your pattern marked on, it's time to start quilting. Because I want to give this flower pattern quite a lot of power in amongst, quite a lot of impact in amongst the piecing, I'm going to make sure that I leave a border around the outside edge, so an area that you haven't quilted, so that the intense quilting of the motif will really stand out. So first of all, we're going to quilt a little edge around the outside, about 1/4 of an inch. This will separate the pattern from the quilting, and it will help give it a bit of pop. I like to use gloves when I'm quilting because it gives me a bit more grip. I just buy myself gardening gloves from the local gardening centre. They're about $5 each, and it just means you can cut the fingers off and they seem to work perfectly well. So that's the border around the outside edge. Just heading straight into a flower. And I'm going to fill this flower in by leaving another border. This time I'm just using a series of spirals. And even within this flower, I've given another little border, just so that you've got some areas of quilting and some areas of no quilting. Okay, so that's one flower almost done. Second one is like a leaf coming up, and then I'm going to just fill that with a echo quilting inside that leaf. It gives it a nice contrast of texture to the heavily scrolled petals of this flower. Back up over the original stitching, and I'm leaving a nice strip around the edges of these flowers because they're going to be filled with circles later on. So in the middle, little scroll on that side, little scroll on that side, and then fill in the other spaces. What you really want is plenty of contrast between lots of stitches and no stitches. So that is that's our 4 petaled flower with 4 leaves. And you know, if you make up your own template and you give it a shot with the things that you're good at, I mean, it's just a good alternative to stippling the whole quilt, which is better for everybody.